Welcome to Legal Resources Radio, where we invite you into the world of social justice, advocacy, and public interest law. Throughout this podcast series, we'll share stories, insights, and expert advice from our dedicated team at the Legal Resources Center, as well as from our valued guests. In each episode, we'll dive into the legal landscape, tackle pressing social issues, and aim to empower you with the knowledge to make a difference. Whether you're a community activist, a legal professional, passionate about social justice, or just curious, this is the place for you. So wherever you are, washing dishes, at work, on the bus, train, or plane, or just relaxing at home, plug in your headphones, take a deep breath, and get ready to begin.
Welcome to the Legal Resources Radio. Today we bring you a story about more than just sport. It's about dignity, equality, and the fundamental right to be recognized for who you are. Brent Janse van Vuuren is a transgender man who joined a CrossFit gym, or box, as I'll let him explain what that means, in 2023. What drew Brent to CrossFit was its inclusivity, its focus on community, a sense of community, among participants, and the website echoes this idea that CrossFit is for everyone. But in 2025, when he was trying to enter this international global competition called CrossFit Open, they said he cannot. He entered all his documents, just had he done in 2024, and they said simply because he is transgender, he is not allowed to compete. Now, CrossFit is a global band that changed its policies quietly. In 2019 to 2024, trans athletes were allowed to compete. Now, in 2025, they said to maintain fairness and the integrity of the competition, they said trans athletes are no longer allowed to compete. Now, some might say that this is genuine or something. I can't really see that. But it seems sneakily familiar to the sentiments coming out of the President Donald Trump presidency and his administration. Now, we live in South Africa, and this may be an American corporation, but they operate here within our country. And we have our own laws, and it does not tolerate discrimination of this kind. We respect equality, dignity, and the right to self-determination. So we're going to hear a little bit from Brent about how this has impacted his life and about how he's not going to just sit by and let this happen to him. He joined CrossFit Open and he joined CrossFit, his box, so that he could be part of a community, so that he could, see his friends and, as he'll say, just have some fun and play with them. But this policy has made sure that he can't. So I'll let him tell you the story, and I'm really excited for him to be here today. Brent, welcome to Legal Resources Radio. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Yeah, it's so nice to have you here. So I'm not personally familiar with your case because I'm not the attorney that's in charge of it, but I have been placed in charge of interviewing you today. So thank you again. We were talking a little bit behind the scenes about the importance of defining terms and having things sort of like the context set out in front of us before we get into the nitty-gritty about your story. So if you'll indulge me for a second, I'm going to do it just for the viewer's sake. So first, let's talk about the concept of sex, right? So it refers to the anatomical body in which a human being is born into, right? So over centuries, many societies have accepted that there are only two sexes, male and female. Right. Recently, it's become, and this isn't necessarily recently in terms of like what is actually true, but recently in terms of what has been commonly accepted. It's been accepted that there's more than two sexes, right? And that sex is on a spectrum, and it's not a binary in terms of the way in which people, fall into two opposites of each other. Then, obviously, connected to that, we have the concept of gender, right? So conventionally, that refers to being a man or a woman. The traditional conservative thought holds that a person's sense of personal identity and their gender correspond to each other. That's obviously the conservative view of it, right? Now, people who experience this and align with this, we refer to them as cisgendered persons, right? However, for transgender persons and gender diverse persons, they don't really fall into this traditional way of thinking, right? Their birth sex is irrelevant towards their sort of gender identification. In case of transgender individuals, they're born a person that born as a male but identify as a female. And then a transgender man born as a female, identifies as a man, right? For gender diverse persons, a person is born male, female, or intersex, but they don't identify according to any gender. Have I kind of covered most things? Did I miss anything?
No, I think language is so important, especially when we start talking about transgender issues. I think a lot of the nuances around the topic gets lost when we don't have shared language. So I'm super glad that you cleared that up in the beginning for us. Yeah.
Sure. No, of course. So now that we've got that out of the way, let's understand you. So I'm going to ask you a really weird question because even I tackle this question every day in my own life. But who is Brent?
So I was born. I'm joking. So I'll give you a quick high-level overview of who I am and what I'm doing. So I basically came out as transgender in 2023. I think for the longest time, like growing up, I knew that I was different. I knew that I was transgender. I mean, for me, growing up in a small town, religious, conservative, I never felt that it is something that was approved of. And so I tried everything to fit in to what society wanted of me and to kind of like play by the rules. I mean, if we think about it, there's certain things that society says, if you do this, you'll be happy. And so I've done all those things, ticked all those boxes. And I don't know, I just got to a point where I looked at my life and I was like, it's a 7 out of 10 if I have to give it a rating. And to be honest, a 7 out of 10 isn't a bad number. A 7 out of 10 is good. Most people, if you say to them, your life can be a 7 out of 10, most people might say, that's a good number, just take it. But a 7 out of 10 is not a 10 out of 10. And so for me, in order to live my life fully, in order to be fully present and fully authentic, it was really important for me that I transition to become in alignment with who I believe to be on the inside. And so my birthday is on Freedom Day. The irony is, in many ways, I've just never felt free. And so what I decided to do on the 26th of April, so the day before my birthday, I decided to make a public announcement and basically updated all my socials and, kind of like come out. Personally, I don't like the term coming out. Sure. It's more like a inviting in and inviting people in to be part of my journey and my story. And so, so on the 26th of April, the day before my birthday, I decided to come out. And to be honest with you, for the most part, everybody has been so receptive. Everybody has been so warm. And in a lot of ways, that if I knew that everybody was going to be so accepting, I probably would have done this a lot earlier.
Sure. What I really like about the rating terminology that you used is, our identity and who we identify as, it's not a test where we get 70% and it's like, oh, I passed and I did really well. I'm cool with that, right? This is who we are. And so for me, the 7 out of 10 or the 70% like indicates that there's something missing there, right? And you'll feel that intrinsically within your heart, within your soul, that there's a part missing. And so it's so important, I think, to say 7 out of 10, fine, it's good, but it's not good enough, right? Exactly. I deserve 10. So I love that analogy. So let's sort of talk a little bit about what we're here today. At the top, I mentioned CrossFit. Yeah. What is, okay, I mean, I know what CrossFit is because I've seen it all over, social media, and I walk past the CrossFit gym every now and again, but you are a CrossFit athlete or recreational athlete. You do it more than I do. Talk to me about what it is and what it means to you.
Well, so for me, when I started or decided to come out publicly in 2023, I thought, sport has always been such a big part of who I am. And so for me, I wanted to find a modality that I can relate with. And CrossFit is always known to be a sport where it's all about inclusion, all about diversity. And so for me, it was an obvious choice. So I wanted to get involved with CrossFit. So what does CrossFit mean for me? Well, when I decided to transition, it was about getting into a place of having a healthier relationship with my body. And so CrossFit became a great way for me to improve my fitness, improve my health, and just, be in a better relationship with my body.
Yeah. When I think about why I like to do competitive running, I mean, I'm by no ways an actual competitive runner. I just like to do it with other people around. And I always say to people why am I doing better when I'm running the marathon versus just going out to the promenade and doing it myself? And I think it's just you're around other people. Maybe not so much that you're comparing yourselves to other people, but you interact with other people and you enjoy the community of it. I always remember I was doing a 21K a while back, and I was really struggling in the last couple kilometers, and a guy came up behind me and like whacked me on the back, and he's like, come on, man, we're almost there, let's do it. And I think that's what's so great about sport, right, is to do it with camaraderie and like community. And so let's talk about the wider community, right? This whole case is not necessarily about your CrossFit block, I think it's called, but about CrossFit Open. Can you talk to us a little bit about what that is?
So the Open is an annual event that allows participants from across the globe to participate. It's a great opportunity to test yourself upon, kind of like against yourself. So for me, when I started CrossFit, I kind of walked into the CrossFit box the first day, and the people are doing the most amazing things. There were people doing like toes to bar and pull-ups and, bar muscle ups. And you look at that and you're like, wow, these people are doing these amazing things. And what is really cool about the CrossFit Open is it gives you something to work to. It gives you something to aspire to. I mean, you talked about running. It's so much easier if you're actually working towards something, right? And so in a lot of ways, the CrossFit Open is something to work for. So every year the Open happens. It's a 3-week event where basically every week a series of workouts are being released. And then at affiliate level, everybody participates. So what happens at our box specifically is we have like a massive throwdown on the Friday night where literally everybody comes down. There's some burgers, there's some beers. It's a big social thing. Like everybody comes down to support. And so the CrossFit Open is really about community. It's about camaraderie. And most importantly, the average recreational athlete. So to put things into context, last year we had 343,000 athletes that participated in the CrossFit Open. That is a massive amount of people. Now, the majority of those people are recreational athletes just like myself, looking to get fit, looking to get healthy, looking to hang out with their mates. And so it really is about the recreational athlete, the everyday athlete looking to test themselves. There's no podiums, there's no medals. It's just literally you competing against yourself.
So I'm just thinking now, I said CrossFit block like I knew what that was. Can you just explain a little bit about what that means?
So CrossFit's got its own little jargon and lingo. So normally what we do is we refer to it as your box. So your box would be it's a fancy word for gym, or not a fancy word for gym. It's more like a CrossFit word for gym. But your box would be basically your gym that you trained at, so kind of like your home base that you go at.
Okay, no, that makes sense. Okay, so you spoke about how cool CrossFit Open is as a concept, as an idea, and how it made you feel. Can we just talk a little bit about, so before this we started this case, what was CrossFit Open's or CrossFit's, policy on transgender athletes?
So CrossFit was very inclusive, to be honest. So to kind of take it a step back, so in 2014, there was a lady by the name of Chloe Johnson. She was a transgender woman, and she actually sued CrossFit because she was not allowed to participate.
Okay.
And so in 2019, CrossFit actually introduced a transgender policy allowing transgender athletes to play. So they had policy in place, they had very specific criteria in place for transgender athletes that they needed to comply with. So for example, in my case, when I wanted to participate last year, I had to submit things like a therapeutic use exemption because I'm on testosterone. So what that basically means is you need to get a letter from your doctor saying this is the medication that you're on, this is your diagnosis, this is why you are taking it. And so these things are very important because fair play in sport is important. So they had these policies in place where you had to apply for a therapeutic use exemption. You also had to do regular blood tests. So as part of my conditions of participating, every 3 months I had to do mandatory blood tests to make sure that I'm within specific ranges.
Jeez. The thing that, we spoke a little bit about it before we started. You were talking to me about like how CrossFit Open can be done in your garage. It can be done in your local gym, or it can be done in your box. And it's a scalable thing, right? In the sense that like you were saying like if you can't do a push-up, you do a knee push-up or a wall push-up. Yeah. It's crazy to me that like you had to go through such rigorous tests, even though they consider the scalability of this kind of like competition. And that I'm not going to use the number because I think you had the number, but it's mostly recreational.
100%.
It's mad.
No, that's why it doesn't make sense. I mean, why should your average recreational athlete jump through all those hoops just in order to play with their friends? And I think it's important to kind of like emphasize there's a difference between recreational sport and elite sport. And for the majority of CrossFit athletes who are literally just playing to compete against themselves, they're not elite athletes. And to jump through that amount of red tape is a lot to ask of an average, participant.
So you spoke a little bit about what you were required to do to compete. Let's talk about CrossFit Open's current policy and what that means and what happened to you.
So basically this year's policy is a complete turnaround on the policy that CrossFit had in place. So previously, like we said, you were allowed to participate based on your gender identity. So this year what they've done is they've basically, in a complete turnaround of events, updated and changed the policy. So normally when people change this policy, it's normally, to make things better and to make it more equitable. But in this case, it actually was a big step back. So what they did is you were, as part of this new gender classification policy, transgender athletes had to participate based on their gender assigned at birth. Now, just looking at that phrase, that is already problematic from a language usage because it's sex assigned at birth, like you mentioned earlier. And so it kind of raises the question as to how much consultation happened when they put this new policy together. So basically the requirement is that transgender athletes now have to participate based on their gender assigned at birth. But the challenge with that is that you are now forcing transgender women to participate in the men's division, completely ignoring the science when it comes to things like hormone replacement therapy. When trans women go on hormone replacement therapy, it has a drastic impact on things like muscle mass, on overall strength, and it basically totally ignores the science. And so what happened with trans men is it basically forced them into the women's division. And like in my case, where I'm on hormone replacement therapy, it basically then excludes us and bans us from participation altogether.
I remember you talking to us earlier this week about a specific section or clause about the reporting of if you suspect something. Can you talk to us a little bit about what that was and maybe how it's a little bit misguided in terms of what it's asking fellow competitors to do to each other?
Yeah, so one of the clauses that's included in this new gender classification policy is clause 9.03.
Okay.
And so it's really important to state that this policy does not just affect trans athletes, it also affects cisgender athletes. So what clause 9.03 basically says is that anybody can be investigated. So if you go to your CrossFit box and you look around and you see somebody who is too fast, maybe her hair's too short, maybe she's too muscular, you can literally report her. So clause 9.03 says that you can report anybody that you suspect is transgender. Now this is problematic in many ways. For one, obviously you can literally force cisgendered women to be prosecuted and targeted through this whole thing. But also it's really problematic because it creates this culture of investigation. So now, what does this mean to the rest of the people in the box? Suddenly a space that's a safe space now becomes a space that is no longer safe because, you're opening it up for scrutiny and judgment.
And I want to bring it back to this recreational element as well, right? It's supposed to be just a space where you can come in, feel welcome, have some fun, get some really good exercise in, and then go home, right? And I think this idea of now putting in a clause there that almost pits yourself against your teammate, your box mate, it's just bizarre. It's crazy.
But not just that.
Yeah.
It also opens up, it's got far-reaching implications. So in my case, I'm kind of en route to, in terms of my transition. I'm very early on. But what happens to somebody who's been transitioned for maybe, say, 10, 15 years, who passes in their everyday life based on their gender, identity? You're now forcing those people to literally out themselves just so that they can play with their friends.
Yeah.
What is the implications of that?
Exactly.
And to circle back to 9.03 and why this actually not just affects trans athletes but cis athletes is what happens if you are reported? There's no policy in terms of how you will be checked. I mean, who is going to be doing the checking? What kind of gender checking are they doing? There's no policy.
Yeah.
And can you imagine? I mean, we don't know what our chromosomes are. I don't know if you know what yours are, but the average person doesn't know. Now imagine you have to find out something that personal of you at that sort of level.
Yeah.
I mean, that could be devastating, you know. And so this policy does not just affect trans athletes; it affects cis athletes as well. Yeah.
And I think this, you know, idea is certainly coming out of a particular place in the United States of America. And I think it's important that we, you know, contextualize it in that sense, right? Because as far as I understand it, from yourself and your box that you're in, you still feel very welcome and accepted. But the CrossFit Open thing isn't necessarily run by, you know, the South African affiliated CrossFit, right? Or at least your box. It's more the, you know, states organization that is CrossFit that is saying this to you, right? And I think that's where the, you know, the tricky sort of legal corporate accountability element is coming in this case, is that we have this constitution here in South Africa that does not tolerate discrimination in this way, right? But we're not talking about CrossFit South Africa, if there is such a thing. I'm not so sure.
Well, there isn't.
Yeah, but we're talking about CrossFit USA, if that even makes sense, right? So with that in mind, and also, like, you know, in terms of the concepts and the topic that we're dealing with, right? It can be very, you know, to put yourself out there. It can be a, you know, I mean, obviously you said you've welcomed people in, right? Now, but those are people that you wanted to welcome in now. Now, by telling the story, you're welcoming everyone in, right? This is my story, and I'm going to take it to court, and I want to deal with it, right? Like, what pushed you to do that, and to take this on in a way?
It's a really good question, and I'm going to be honest, it was a very difficult decision to make. Where I was standing personally, I felt like I had done everything that I could do in my personal capacity. So I'd reached out to CrossFit. I wanted to have dialogue with them. In fact, I'd actually started my conversations with them way back in 2024, the first time that I participated. So I felt that I had a relationship with them. So I'd reached out to them and I said, can we reconsider this policy? I'm just a social athlete. I mean, out of the back of 2024, I was ranked like number 147,000. So I'm not winning anything. You know, I'm just an average recreational athlete wanting to play with my friends. And so I reached out to them and said, can we have a dialogue? Can we have a conversation about this? You know, yes, these are policies that you've implemented from the USA, but you also have to remember that you're a global organization and you've got a footprint in, if I'm talking under correction, but in around 15,000 affiliates that they've got globally.
Sure.
These are across different countries, different races, different cultures, you know, different constitutions, different legal systems that operate in each of these places. And so in a lot of ways, whatever you do from a US perspective have to be accommodating, you know, or at least considerate of that. So I, in my personal capacity, reached out to them. I wanted to have a conversation. And I was given kind of like a generic reply. And you know, like I said, I thought we had a relationship with them. So I reached out to them. My next step was to obviously reach out to my affiliate owner. So my box where I train, I had a chat to him. And he said to me he wasn't even aware that the policy was changed. Now, that is massively concerning because at the end of the day, it's the affiliate owner who has to deal with this fallout. He has to now deal with me, who's upset because I can't participate.
Yeah.
But he hasn't even been informed that this change has happened. So he found out at about the same time that I did, which means that they didn't even consult with their affiliates, which is really problematic. So I reached out to him. I know my affiliate reached out to CrossFit. I reached out to CrossFit. And nothing happened. There was a local petition drawn up, and I know last time I checked, there was over 3,000 people who had signed it, you know, saying that this policy is discriminatory and we don't stand for it. And CrossFit also just did not respond. And so the challenge, I think, is what do you do? Where do you go? You know, it's these corporates coming in kind of like, you know, just shutting you down and in a big way kind of bullying you.
Yeah.
You know, and so the question is, what do you then do as an individual? I followed all the processes, I followed all the correct steps, and unfortunately, you then have to take the next step, and then that becomes legal action.
Just going back a little bit, so let's say because you guys will operate in your own box and you will compete. What if you had just competed? What did they say they would do? Would they just not consider anything that you did, or they would ignore that you were there? Like, did they explain how that process of not letting you compete would work?
Well, it's kind of problematic because I'd followed the correct process from the beginning. So in 2024, I'd reached out to them. I'd already kind of put myself on their radar.
Yeah.
And so I'd reached out to them again in the beginning of the year saying, what is the implications of this policy and my involvement and my participation? And they basically told me outright that I'm banned from participation.
Sure.
And so you're kind of cutting my hands off. I can't just go and just participate because where do I log my scores?
Okay.
So just also maybe a little bit of extra context. So they've got an online app. And on this app, you can also record your scores year upon year. Okay. And so a big thing is, like I said earlier, it's about tracking yourself against yourself. So now you can see, last year I was 147,000. I was hoping to maybe, 145,000 this year. But there's no way for me of tracking that now.
Okay.
And so the thing is, I can't just go and just play because firstly, the system doesn't recognize me. But let's pretend I didn't follow the system. And so let's just pretend I just went and I played. There's also now the risk that because of clause 9.03, somebody can report me.
Yeah.
And so I am in the fortunate position of being publicly out. I'm visible. But for a lot of trans people, it's a real big debate as to whether you are visible or whether you are stealth. A lot of trans people choose to be stealth because they don't want to be open to all the stigma that sits in the space. Yeah. Unfortunately for me as a business owner, I did not have the luxury of being able to be stealth. I had to be visible. Yeah. And in a lot of cases, that's why I think it's really important that because of that position of privilege that I'm in, where I am visible, and it's safe for me to be visible, that I use my voice to speak up.
Yeah, and I think it's really brave because I think like this case, speaks not only to sort of putting yourself as your identity and who you are out there, but it's also tackling, a behemoth of a corporate organization. And I think, at the Legal Resources Center, we're tackling a very similar question when it comes to holding social media companies to account, right? So in a very similar way to CrossFit, Facebook, X, blah, 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 operate their social media accounts platforms here in South Africa, right? And one thing that we've been asking them for is you need to be, accountable for the kind of content you allow online. And that content has to, be moderated according to our context, right? So if you are posting xenophobic content that only South Africans would understand, and your moderators behind the wall don't understand that content, they're not going to pick it up. And so you have to consider that, right? It's your responsibility. You have a service that is operating in our country, right? We have our own rules and laws and regulations that's based on a long history of like discrimination, but, progressive change. So CrossFit is another example. They're a global organization, yes, they come from wherever they come from, but they're operating here, right? And South Africans who understand the law that South Africa is governed by are going to compete, and they're going to go to CrossFit. And they understand a certain kind of law. You can't just come in here and say, this is our policy, you need to accept it. I think most South Africans would be very unaccepting of that. And that's your position as well, correct?
Absolutely. I mean, I think as South Africans, more than any other country, I think we understand what discrimination looks like. I mean, I think just out of the back of our apartheid history, I think we really value the hard-fought constitution that we have. A lot of people paid with their blood, sweat, and tears, and in many cases, even their lives for our constitution, and for us to have the freedoms that we have. As a trans man, I'm really proud to be South African because I'm protected here. Our South African constitution was one of the first to recognize gender identity, and we were one of the first 5 countries in the world to recognize gay marriage. Our constitution is really progressive, and I think it's really important that we protect it just based on where we have been.
And so you're going to, use our judicial system to challenge this. Obviously, we're still in the very early stages of that, and so I'm not going to talk too much about the legal process. I'm also going to put our listeners to sleep, so I'm not going to do that. But I just want to say, I think, it's really brave that you're doing this, and we're grateful that you came to us. I'm just interested, when you were making the decision, two challenges. So how did you, hear about us? Why did you come to us specifically? Yeah.
It's a very good question. So for me, like I said, I'd followed all the steps that I, as a layman, can do. I've reached out to them, I spoke to them, I had my CrossFit affiliate speak to them. And so I was kind of like talking to my friends, and somebody said that I really needed to look at the Legal Resource Centre. You guys come with over 45 years of standing up for injustices, fighting discrimination. It made absolutely sense. I think very often what happens is that the biggest challenge for people seeking justice is things like resources. Let's be honest, like legislating any sort of change is really expensive. And I think the fact that the Legal Resources Centre does offer like legal support, especially to marginalised communities like transgender folks, is really super helpful, because it allows us to kind of actually take legal action. I think often resources become a big limiting factor as to why people don't do it. And also, the Legal Resource Centre has some of the best and brightest minds on their teams, and it makes sense. It makes absolutely sense that, that I partner with you guys.
Okay. Well, as I mentioned at the top, I'm not personally handling your case, but I know that you're in very good hands. And so I wish you a lot of luck with that. But so as we close up now, I kind of want to just, give you the floor a little bit to speak about, you're a transgender athlete, even if it's recreational, you do this every single day, and you're challenging, this really awful discriminatory practice. What can you tell other transgender athletes that might be feeling the same way now? They're feeling crunched by the system. They're feeling like they can't, let people in, as you said. What do you say to them? How do you encourage them to sort of, be more open, or just to be more proud of who they are?
Well, I think we find ourselves in very interesting times at the moment. And I think it's one of those watershed moments where we have to decide, where do we stand? And I think it's really important that through this, we don't lose sight of people's humanity. At the end of the day, trans people are just people. And it's about allowing everybody the space to exist and to just live their lives. And so I think it's about, as a trans person, if you are privileged enough to be visible and it's safe for you to be visible, I think it's really important that you use your voice. I think back in the 1970s, we had Harvey Milk saying that if you are gay, you need to stand up and you need to speak out and you need to be seen. And suddenly people realized that, oh my goodness, my teacher, my doctor, my bus driver are all gay. And I think one of the biggest challenges that transgender people face is the fact that we become invisible if we have passing privilege. So for a lot of trans people, once they start passing, they kind of like blend into the rest of society. It's only in that first couple of years while you're on route to, while you're busy transitioning, that you are quite visible. But after that, you become quite invisible. And I think a lot of people don't realize, but in their everyday lives, they're talking to transgender people, they're engaging with transgender people. And it's not the scary boogeyman that the media would love you to believe. At the end of the day, trans people are just humans trying to, get on with their everyday. And I think we should not lose sight of people's humanity in all of this.
So last thing, sport, is the way I've understood it, has always been like a great game changer. It's like always publicly available for people to, compete in, but also to watch. It's always gets people, talking. So how can we publicize this? Like, how do we get people to, rally behind you, push for real change and help you out in this fight for fairness in sport, let's say?
Well, I think it's about speaking up when you see injustices happening. So one of the ways that people can take action right now is there is a petition going around. I'm sure we can drop it in the show notes and sure, folks can absolutely click through and, sign the petition. But I think it's also about being on the lookout for misinformation. So, when you go on social media and you're seeing people saying things that are discriminatory and hateful, and, I think it's about speaking up. I think in a lot of cases there's that saying that, it's a privilege to be silent, or silence is a privilege. And I think it's really important that people speak up. I mean, people like myself right now, I don't have the privilege of being silent. I have to speak up. Whether or not I want to or not, I think it's important that I do. But I think to kind of like kick it back and, you know, if you think about it, it's kind of like a bell curve, right? You've got your 5% on the left and you've got your 5% on the right, and they're all making a lot of noise. But the 90% of people who sit in the middle, the everyday folk that are just looking to get on with their life, they just want to take their kids to school, they just want to make sure that everybody is taken care of, they just want to be happy. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it's those people, you know, I think that often don't realize the power that they have. And so, you know, if you're in that middle space and you see content that show up in your timeline, it's important to speak up. Yeah. It's important to report it, you know, and it's important to make your voice heard in those little pockets of community that you hold.
Brent, thank you so much for joining us. This was an incredible conversation, and thank you for sharing your story with us. And go sign the petition.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for tuning in to Legal Resources Radio. We hope you enjoyed today's episode and gained some valuable insights. If you did, or even if you didn't, please remember to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Legal Resources SA, or visit our website at lrc.org.za for updates and exclusive content on the incredible work our team is doing. We'll see you on the next episode of Legal Resources Radio. Stay curious, stay inspired, and keep up the good fight.